Many of you may know the Morris twins. They each have made numerous stops to different teams throughout their careers and were always known to be scrappy on the basketball court. Each of them has found a way to get involved in a ton of fights throughout their careers, so we decided to take the best fights and share them with you guys here in this video. Let's kick the video off with one of the more iconic fights when Marcus Morris just had enough of Justin Anderson. But stick around until the end of the video because we have a pretty serious fight involving Markieff later on. The Knicks were just blowing out the Washington Wizards early in the third quarter of this game, and Marcus Morris was at the top of the three-point arc scanning the floor for another player to pass the ball to. Justin Anderson was the man defending Morris on that particular possession, and it didn't seem like he was doing anything super annoying. He was just kind of moving his arms and legs to stay in front of him while doing everything in his power to not let him pass the basketball to an open player. Morris got aggravated by this for some reason and swung his elbow at Anderson's face. Justin immediately dodged the swing but looked over to the officials while yelling something about the swing to try and get a foul called on Morris. Now that seemed to enrage Morris even further, and he actually bashed Justin over the head with a basketball, knocking him back and giving him such a confused look because he didn't think what happened was actually real. Oh, but it was, and Marcus actually started walking over to Justin as if he wanted to start a fight before the officials finally got themselves involved and tried to split the two of them up before it became an even bigger altercation. But seriously though, why would you hit somebody over the head with the basketball and then get mad that they aren't fighting you? So you walk over and start yapping at them. This whole thing just doesn't make much sense to me, especially since the game that they were playing wasn't even meaningful, like a playoff atmosphere where emotions are just left out on the floor. No, these teams were actually just playing a preseason contest, and Morris still wasn't able to control himself. If an NBA player hitting somebody over the head with a basketball mid-game during the preseason doesn't define the last few years for the Knicks, then I don't know what does. It was a tough time for the Knicks, but thankfully Morris wasn't banned for the year or anything like that, though he was ejected from that game. This next fight involved Marcus as well, only this time it was against Larry Nance Jr. and the Cleveland Cavaliers. Marcus was playing for the Boston Celtics, and LeBron James attempted an alley-oop to a cutting Nance. Morris was the man defending him on this possession, and when he jumped up to contest the alley-oop attempt, he accidentally threw himself against Nance in the air. Nance flew down onto the floor with Marcus standing over him and saying something. Then he sprung up in a fit of rage, giving Marcus a strong two-handed shove to his back. At this point, it became a free-for-all. Players from both teams ran in to separate them as they were about to throw down right there on the basketball court. Marcus was able to seemingly slap Nance in the face, which threw him back a few steps. That was enough to get other teammates and staff members involved and made for an easy separation for the two men. By the time Morris came out of the pile that was created, he was smiling and laughing at the crowd, trying to hype them up and get it louder in the TD Garden. Nance, as expected, was not nearly as happy and didn't say another word while the cameras were on him. Now, which brother do you think will be involved in this next clip? If you picked Marcus again, then you'd be correct. Although the last and arguably the worst fight that we have saved for the end of the video does happen to involve Markieff, so make sure you stick around to find out what happened there. For now, we're hanging with Marcus. Marcus was still on the New York Knicks during this time, and he was hit with the daunting task of having to defend and box out Joel Embiid in the paint. The two could be seen wrestling around while a Philadelphia player put up a mid-range shot and knocked it down. Almost instantly after the shot went through the net, Morris dragged Embiid back and threw him onto the ground. Embiid bounced up to try and run at Morris, but by this point there was already enough people in the way so neither could make physical contact with one another. It took 3 76ers players and their head coach to push Embiid away from the pile in an effort to calm their star big man down a little bit. Meanwhile, Morris was trying his best to escalate the situation by slipping away from his restraints and following Embiid as he was being held off. After a bit more arguing, the two players were finally separated and the game resumed, though this is just something that we've grown accustomed to seeing when talking about Marcus. And here he is yet again getting into a fight with the Knicks, only this time it was against another superstar big man in the league. Only 4 minutes had passed in the first quarter between the Knicks and the Denver Nuggets, and Morris was boxing out Nikola Jokic after Will Barton attempted a three-pointer. The two players kind of got their arms tangled up with one another during the box-out, which resulted in Morris throwing an arm out to Jokic while he was running back on defense. Jokic immediately turned back around and went forehead to forehead with Morris to talk some trash. Then, Markieff delivered yet another shove to get Jokic away from him, and that's when things started to get a little more heated than intended. Jokic made the right decision and simply walked away from the pile to avoid any future punishment that could have gone his way, while Markieff had to be restrained by multiple referees. Jamal Murray flew in to go after Morris as well in an attempt to defend his teammate, but was met by Julius Randle very quickly. The two basically held each other's arms while Randle walked Murray away from the pile to calm everything down as fast as possible. The commentators even believed that Markieff's first one-handed shove was in fact a punch that just didn't connect with Jokic. If that punch would have connected, then this fight could have been 10 times worth for both parties. Just like this next fight involving Markieff Morris, although this isn't his best fight yet, so stick around to find out what that one is. Markieff was a member of the Detroit Pistons a while back, and the team was up against Paul George and the Indiana Pacers. There were about 5 seconds left in regulation, with the Pacers up 12 points, and the Pistons just dribbling the clock out so that they could go home. While Morris was standing there dribbling it out, George ran up to him and poked the ball away for a steal. At this point, the clocks hit 0, and Markieff walked straight up to George as the two players started arguing and trash-talking, even though the game was already over. Unfortunately for both teams, because those clocks had hit 0, all of the players on the bench were now technically allowed to run onto the court, and that resulted in a massive mess right at half court. Both Markieff and George exchanged shoves, but at that point there was too many people in the pile to see what else happened between them. All that the cameras could see was a flurry of people shoving and pushing their way into the center of the pile. Some wanted to break it up and play the peacemaker role, while others simply wanted to let some steam out themselves. Morris was restrained rather quickly, but it took multiple staff members to literally drag George away from the pile in order to calm him down. If George had simply not poked the ball away while the clock was winding down, none of this would have even started on the court in the first place. Honestly, that fight wasn't a good look for either player as they made their way off the court, just like this next fight. Markieff was on the Phoenix Suns for a brief amount of time, and he didn't always get along with his teammates. The team was in a bit of a funk, so during a timeout, Markieff was trying to explain something to a teammate on the bench. At first, it looked like he was just trying to hype him up or maybe chew him out a little bit, but later it was pretty obvious that there were no kind words said during that talk. Archie Goodwin was the player who was being harassed by Morris on the bench, and he suddenly sprung up out of his seat and gave his own teammate, Markieff, a two-handed shove. This immediately ignited the bench, and the team needed a few guys to step in between the two players and stop them before things got even worse. They had to hold each of them back to try and calm them down, but Markieff was pointing and yelling at Archie the entire time he was being restrained. It isn't even really clear what was said in that timeout, but apparently Archie had an issue with the way Markieff was up in his face yelling over something. Now, it's rare for teammates to get at it both on and off the court, yet this was one of those times. And it was especially weird because the fight ended up getting physical where both players were shoving each other. And this last fight also happened to get physical, and it was one of the worst of Markieff's entire NBA career. This one took place when he was on the Washington Wizards. The team was up against the Houston Rockets with about 40 seconds left in the first quarter of action, yet tempers were already flaring. Markieff went up for a layup in the paint and was defended very nicely by James Ennis, resulting in a miss while the Rockets took the rebound and began running the other way. However, Morris was upset that there wasn't a foul called as he believed that he got hit on his way up for the shot. So Morris ended up deciding to spin around and deliver a hard elbow to the face of Ennis, who was just trying to run up the court and join his team on offense. Right after that elbow connected to the chest of Ennis, the two players bumped foreheads and began exchanging words. Luckily, there were multiple referees still on that end of the court to jump in and blow a bunch of whistles before the fight was able to get completely out of hand. Each player had quite a few words to say to one another as they were being separated and pulled apart, but had they not been separated that quickly, I'm pretty sure this one would have gotten a lot worse. Markieff literally threw an elbow at Ennis when they were just running up the court, and it didn't even seem like Ennis was even trash-talking prior to that moment. Want more fights? Then click on one of the videos that appear on your screen.